The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. The 7-day ceasefire collapses. Gaza suffers a wave of attacks from north to south, causing many civilian casualties. Israel blames Hamas for ending the ceasefire by firing rockets across the border. The United States and Qatar say efforts to resume the truce will continue. Our other headlines: business or pleasure without any extra paperwork. China introduces visa-free travel for passport holders from 6 countries. And an ancient tradition facing a very current challenge: the blooming threat to eel fishing in Northern Ireland. The week-long ceasefire in Gaza is over. After days of hostage and prisoner exchanges, there was no extension, with both sides blaming each other for the return to violence. Israeli warplanes resumed their bombardment with large airstrikes on the city of Khan Yunis and the city of Rafah. Hamas officials say many homes were hit, with dozens of civilians killed. There are reports of rocket fire into southern Israel. The final groups of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners were released late on Thursday. 110 Israeli and foreign nationals have now been freed by Hamas in exchange for 240 Palestinians. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Akram Al-Satari in Gaza. Akram, in Khan Yunis and Rafah, just how bad is the situation there?
Well, as a matter of fact, the situation is not just bad, the situation is catastrophic, and I'm using the words of the people who are losing their deeds and coming to the hospital. The ones who are targeted now in Khan Yunis, a house was targeted, and in Rafah also a house was targeted. According to the Minister of Health, 10 people were killed in those 2 incidents, and also according to the spokesperson of the Minister of Health, at least 109 Palestinians were killed, with this number not included. So the number actually is 119 Palestinians that were killed, and hundreds others were injured. There are some fire belts all over the area in Khan Yunis Asat al-Gharbi area, which is indicative of an Israeli large-scale military activity planned in that particular area, which is likely to take more lives of the people and destroy more houses. So the situation is ever worsening since the end of the ceasefire, 7 a.m. this morning.
What have the Palestinians said about why the truce was not extended?
Well, there were some statements that were made by Hamas, because Hamas is the main Palestinian faction that is negotiating with Israel through the Egyptians, through the Qataris, and they said that Israel provided them with lists of Israeli female soldiers in the hope that Israel would be able to release them, but they rejected that. They were providing Israel with 3 or 4 different offers, but according to their statements, Israel refused all of those offers. So to the Palestinians, they think that Israel is to blame for the failure in proceeding with the negotiation and in the release of more Israeli captives, and also subsequently the release of more Palestinian prisoners. So Palestinians blame Israel for this.
Akram, can we assess what this might now mean for humanitarian aid getting into Gaza?
The humanitarian aid that has been entering Gaza is very slow from the very beginning. 200, as stated by the different UN actors, 200 truckloads a day for Gaza is not sufficient, is not even the minimum that Gaza needs. Gaza needs 800 to 1,000 truckloads. What was allowed into Gaza was the minimum. It provided some fuel to sustain and operate some of the very essential plants, water pumping, sewage collection, and stuff like that, but it is not sufficient to help the Gazans live a decent level of life. And in the last day, 23 truckloads were only allowed into Gaza. So the Gazans are facing a humanitarian crisis, and they are expected to face a more profound humanitarian crisis as this fire is resumed and this bombardment is continuous.
Akram, thank you for that. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari in Gaza. Well, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken had been trying to broker an extension of the truce, urging Israel to avoid massive civilian losses in Gaza, but the airstrikes resumed just as he was leaving Tel Aviv. Our correspondent there is Sarah Coates. Sarah, Antony Blinken's plea then obviously went unheeded, but the United States continuing to apply pressure. What has Israel said about the reasons for the ceasefire ending?
Hi, Jamie. Well, look, Israel's Prime Minister's office says that Hamas violated the terms of this ceasefire. It says it did that by not handing back women and children and also firing rockets into Israel. Now, we heard from a government spokesperson, Eylon Levy, just a short while ago. He elaborated on that statement, saying that Hamas will now receive the mother of all thumpings. Now, look, as we go to air, Israeli airstrikes are continuing right across the Gaza Strip as rockets continue to be fired from the Strip into Israeli territory. Now, in the last few hours, there have been a number of civilian targets hit. We're talking here homes and also vehicles. Now, as you mentioned, all of this after the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken boarded that plane to head to other parts of the Middle East. And look, the United States has been putting a lot of pressure on Israel to not only confine its ground operation to certain parts of the Strip, but also to protect humanitarians or protect civilians on the ground. Now, we've also heard from the Biden administration, a little earlier today, it is levelling a warning at Israel that it will now put visa bans on settlers who violently attack Palestinians in the West Bank. This is after an alarming spike in settler attacks since these October 7 attacks down in the south. The Biden administration now says it will not put up with this and will deal with, take action against a number of individuals.
And the final group of hostages were freed overnight. I mean, is it possible to say what the sense is in Israel now this conflict has resumed with such intensity?
Well, look, there is a lot of worry here on the ground. We do need to remember there are still 137 people being held inside the Gaza Strip. And these families here that remain without answers, they are desperate to hear whether their loved ones are alive. It's been almost 2 months, no contact from these people, and no visits also from the Red Cross, which was part of that deal which fell through earlier this morning. Now, what we did hear from the Foreign Ministry Deputy Director, he spoke a little while ago in Dubai about this hostage situation. He said naturally we'd reach a point where, again, we would want to find a way to make sure all of our kidnapped are released. And he went on to say that part of it might be out of discussions, but part of it could be through other means without elaborating any further there. So, look, once again, there is a lot of concern here on the ground, more protests planned for today as these families and these people participating in the Bring Them Back Home Now movement are calling on the government to do more as time ticks away and these airstrikes continue.
Sarah, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Sarah Coates in Israel. Well, let's talk to Gilbert Achcar, the Professor of Development Studies and International Relations at SOAS in the University of London. Gilbert, good to see you. Welcome. What are the obstacles preventing a deal to continue the ceasefire?
Well, exactly the same reason that that is preventing first Israel to accept the idea of a ceasefire and even the United States to call for a ceasefire, which is that they have set themselves the goal, the target of eradicating Hamas, destroying Hamas, as they say, and that can't be achieved by occupying just one half of Gaza. So they definitely want to continue until they reoccupy the whole of the Gaza Strip, which will have an absolutely huge cost. It has already had a tremendously high cost of 15,000 people killed, which is a massacre of genocidal proportion. But if Israel carries on occupying the rest of Gaza, the number of victims will I mean, skyrocket. I mean, it will go far beyond what we've seen until now. So basically, yes, that's what they want to carry on there, and that's why they reject the idea of a ceasefire and only accept the idea of momentary, temporary pauses, truce, as it's called, nothing more.
Given the continuation of talks between Qatari and Egyptian mediators, do you see any possibility for de-escalation or ceasefire?
Well, there have been kind of leaks or informations about these ongoing discussions in Qatar between the heads of the intelligence services of Egypt, the Mossad, the Israeli Mossad, the American CIA, and I mean, one scenario that is discussed, apparently, probably something that the Egyptian side is trying to promote, is the idea of an evacuation of the Hamas fighters and leaders, following the pattern of what happened in Beirut in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, and you had the siege of Beirut, and then that was kind of resolved by the evacuation of the PLO fighters and leaders from Beirut by sea. So there are talks about a scenario of this kind, but I'm far from sure that either of the two sides could accept that, whether Hamas or Israel. I'm not sure that any of these two sides would be satisfied with such a formula.
Gilbert, good to talk to you, and thanks very much for your analysis. Gilbert Achcar, Professor of Development Studies and International Relations at SOAS in the University of London. World leaders are gathering in Dubai as the United Nations COP28 Climate Summit is underway. Let me show you the live pictures. There we have the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is telling the audience and telling world leaders, obviously in particular, that you cannot save a burning planet with a fire hose of fossil fuels. We'll stay with those pictures just for a moment. He's obviously not the only keynote speaker there today. Earlier, Britain's King Charles warned that the world is reaching alarming tipping points on climate change and that inaction would lead to catastrophe. Opening the United Nations COP Climate Change Summit in Dubai, he said the dangers of global warming are no longer a distant risk, and urged global leaders to use this conference as a critical turning point.
Unless we rapidly repair and restore nature's unique economy based on harmony and balance, which is our ultimate sustainer, our own economy and survivability will be imperiled.
Let's talk to our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki, who's watching the summit in Dubai. Adel, stark warnings from King Charles. What more did he have to say?
Well, as he also encouraged world leaders to look for financing green projects and phasing out of fossil fuels and supporting all the climate action for global and developing countries specifically, he also posed some questions to the world leaders as if pointing out that they are not fulfilling their commitments. One of the questions was quite remarkable, asking the world leaders how much do they want Earth to be dangerous for living. And that's just one of the many fiery statements we've been hearing today. And right after talking about public finance, that it is not enough for funding any green energy, specifically as nations fail to commit to their targets, the financial targets, he also invited and called for engagement of the private sector in green finance. And right after King Charles' speech, Prime Minister Sunak vowed $2 billion for the Green Climate Fund by the UK throughout the next 3 years. And that's about 12% increase from what the UK has offered and submitted in the past 3. So there is some progress happening in terms of financing, but the figure the UK announced is far from what United Arab Emirates has offered, $30 billion fund to support green financing across the world, directed and dedicated for developing countries. So this kind of race is actually what many are hoping to see in this COP, that nations are racing for the sake of the planet, for the sake of reaching solutions that would change and provide tangible results when it comes to limiting the rise in Earth's temperature and try to contain it within the 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Adele, in a sense, the speeches, talk and pledges are easy, aren't they? I mean, is there a sense that there will be some concrete progress made at this summit that will really affect change?
Yes, definitely. One of the things that are on the table is to expand the inclusion of topics that have not been much engaged with and try to put it part of the indices. One of that is having a zero methane emission target that will be part of the national indices for all participants here. That should be one of the main results, and a deadline for it, sort of something like 2030, 2040 for developing countries and so on. That's what the image here, or the leaders are trying to propose, and still negotiations have not tackled in depth. Also, beside that, there is the discussion on the impact of climate on healthcare and health levels of people living on the planet as well. And that's the first that this COP tries to engage with. That's, of course, beside the financing, which I've mentioned, and it still remains a key factor. But more importantly, the obligation of each nation to meet its climate action standards and vision. That's what the UN has been calling for, and every other organization and nation also have been calling for. This comes as this COP28 just finishes the conclusion of the global stocktake since Paris 2015, and another stocktake with new targets for each country is expected to be part of this COP as well.
Adele, thank you for that. Back with you later in the day. Our correspondent Adele Al-Marouki in Dubai. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, all aboard the first day of China's visa-free travel for 6 countries. So what does it all mean for holidays and business?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. The 7-day ceasefire collapses. Gaza suffers a wave of attacks from north to south, causing many civilian casualties. Israel blames Hamas for ending the ceasefire by firing rockets across the border. The United States and Qatar say efforts to resume the truce will continue. Now, it's just got a whole lot easier to visit China. The government has begun trialling visa-free travel for certain countries, mainly in Europe, from December. Travellers from France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands and Malaysia can now go to China for business or pleasure without any extra paperwork. Visitors from these countries will be able to stay in China without a visa for up to 15 days. The trial will run for a year and is aimed at boosting rather sluggish tourism after 3 years of strict COVID controls. Our correspondent Zhou Jiaxin reports now from one of Beijing's international airports.
Flights from 6 countries, including Germany and Spain, arrived at the Beijing Capital International Airport early this morning, with the citizen those becoming the latest batch of visa-free travelers to enter China for up to 15 days. Obviously, easier cross-border travel and more opportunities for post-pandemic economic activities.
In this way, it's very easy. You just book your flight. You can come more often to China. So I'm very happy about this.
Yet it is a part of China's continuous effort to improve its visa policies. Among measures since the beginning of the year, China has scrapped all COVID testing requirements and streamlined visa application services in countries including the United States and the United Kingdom. In July, China resumed a visa-free entry for citizens of Singapore and Brunei. Early in November, it expanded its visa-free transit policy to 54 countries to include citizens of Norway.
To ensure a smooth implementation of visa-free entry, the immigration inspection has coordinated with airports and airlines regarding data, personnel deployment, and inspection services, making sure it is efficient and orderly.
China has signed a visa-free pact with Kazakhstan, Madagascar, and other countries, reaching a total of 155 mutual agreements this year.
Inbound tourism here in China is still widely seen to hold great potential in China after it took a hit during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the first 10 months this year have registered more than 26 million foreign visitors, and China cares for more favorable visa policy to attract more from overseas. CGTN, Beijing.
The United States has postponed its supply of long-range rocket-propelled bombs to Ukraine until next year. A Pentagon spokesman says the delivery is expected to take place in early 2024. The rocket-propelled bombs will allow Ukraine to hit targets twice the distance it can reach now at nearly 160-kilometer range. The low-cost airline Ryanair has been caught up in the so-called fake parts scandal gripping the aviation industry. The Irish company said maintenance checks revealed 2 engines contained fake components. Airlines are scrambling to assess their engines after Delta, American and Southwest Airlines revealed they too had purchased counterfeit parts. Regulators believe a London-based company is supplying components with fake certification documents. A court in the United States has reinstated a gagging order barring former President Donald Trump from criticizing court staff in his civil fraud trial. The presiding judge claims his chambers are being inundated by threats, prompting him to make the order. An appeals court judge had lifted the gag order on free speech grounds. Trump has already violated the order twice, incurring $15,000 in fines. Eel fishing has been a tradition in Northern Ireland since the dawn of time, but fishermen and small businesses there are facing a modern environmental problem: algae. Our correspondent Sue Xiaoxiao reports.
The banks of Lough Neagh have been home to the McNally family for decades, and creatures living in the lake's dark waters have been an important source of income. But this year, their eel fishing business is in trouble. And to find the source of the problem, we just follow the foul smell.
But this is something I would never have seen in my lifetime, and even talking to my dad as well. Like, the oxygen in the water level has dropped because of this, and the eel has went elsewhere looking at oxygen.
The algae bloom has been poisoning Lough Neagh since the summer, when record heat waves scorched the UK and the rest of Europe. However, experts believe the major cause of the outbreak was excessive nutrients discharged from nearby farmlands.
Not all of it is absorbed by the soil or by the plants, and it washes into the rivers. In terms then of the animal waste, it has to be gotten rid of, and so it is spread on the ground. And once that is spread on the ground, again, the soil does not have the capacity to absorb it all, and therefore a high proportion of it washes into the streams and rivers and then down into the loch here.
Northern Ireland launched a Going to Growth campaign in 2012 to boost its agricultural sector, which led to drop-off of many efforts to improve water quality in the region. Since 2012, phosphorus has risen more than 50% in Northern Irish rivers, many of which are linked to Lough Neagh. Many here blame a dysfunctional political environment for the worsening ecological system.
This is why we have massive, massive pollution, because our legal structure doesn't work, our government doesn't work, and nothing is protecting our environment.
The Northern Ireland Assembly has been suspended since last February, when the second largest party within the power-sharing government withdrew in protest against a post-Brexit trade deal set by the British government. However, in September, Sinn Féin, the Assembly's largest party, called for efforts to curb the pollution in Lough Neagh after it was warned that this year's eel fishing season was seriously impacted by the algae outbreak. But for fishermen like the McNallys, the price caused by the political deadlock has already been paid.
Myself, how long I'll be able to last, I don't know. It's just because I love what I'm doing. I love been fishing. It's in the blood, as we say. It's in our generations. But how long we can stick at it or last at it, it's very uncertain.
苏夏晓 CGTN London.
And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Tierney. Well, over to Europe. And heavy snow pummeled quite a lot of locations across the central portion of Europe, including many portions of Germany. And the photo shows that people are busy with cleaning up the thick snow above the ground here in Germany. And all of these unsettled weather is due to a very potent upper-level low vortex, which is moving from the north all the way down towards into the south. And under the influence of it, we're likely to see more snow to develop, particularly for the southern portion of Germany over this weekend. And heavy snow here for Saturday, and then it will be weakening towards into some moderate amount of snow. And the continuous snow will definitely lead to some travel disruptions over this weekend when many people are planning to get out. So please take necessary precaution to stay safe. And temperature-wise, we're likely to see significant drops in temperatures, particularly for many portions of France, Germany, as well as Italy over this weekend under the influence of the snowy conditions as well as the movement of the cold air. So please be well prepared and bundle up as well. About business and travel, and overcast conditions for Copenhagen with a high of -2 and low about -5, and potential snow to hit Helsinki with the overnight low temperatures about 11 degrees Celsius below freezing level. So please put on an extra layer, especially during the morning and evening hours, to stay warm. And that is all from me. Stay tuned for more City Forecast.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Herdsmen find new, efficient ways to raise sheep. Conservationists find ways to protect rare breeds of birds and monkeys in the deep jungles.